Hi friends, hope you are doing well. I am Dr. Ganguly. Welcome to my channel. So today I am going to talk about quality versus quantity. And this is an issue which often comes up in discussing things such as number of publications as far as researchers are concerned. So there is the school of thought that you should have a very few papers with high quality, and there is the school of thought that quantity of papers is generally a good idea. It shows that the author or researcher has been very productive, and this is somebody we should actually hire. So let's look at this issue in general as far as creative professions are concerned, whether quantity is important, whether quality is important, and what is the relationship between these two metrics. So there is actually some proof about some experiments which have been done to cast some light on this quantity versus quality debate. So there is the well-known pottery experiment, and in this experiment what was done is that there was a class of ceramics, and essentially this class was supposed to make pots, and the teacher or professor divided this class into two groups. One of the groups was going to focus on quantity and the second on quality. So as far as the quantity group was concerned, what they would do is in the final day of the class they would essentially bring all the pots they have made, and the teacher would weigh all the pots, and then he would give them grades depending on the weight of the pot. So if they had more than 50 pounds of pots, they would get A. If they had more than 40 pounds of pots, they would get B, and so on. So you get the point here. Essentially this quantity group was just supposed to make pots and just make as many of them as possible. Now the quality group needed to produce one superlative pot, and this pot they would then show to the teacher, and the teacher would essentially grade them on the quality of this pot. Now at the end of this, what happened is that the teacher found that the best pots always came out of the quantity group, and many of the pots which were made by the quantity group were actually better in quality than the one great pot made by the quality group. So what exactly happened here? What happened here, according to this professor, was that the quality group spent a lot of time in theorizing. They essentially did a lot of case studies, a lot of empirical work, maybe they did mathematical modeling and so on, and at the end of this process they essentially figured out how they would make the optimal and best pot, and then they would make this and give it to the teacher. Now what the quantity group was trying to do is that it was trying to make as many pots as possible, and in the process of making a large number of pots, what the quantity group figured out was how to improve the pot. So simply by doing practice they actually became better at that art, and so after a lot of practice trying to produce 40 pound or 50 pound of pots, they actually produced pots which were better in quality than the quality group could do. So essentially what does this lesson tells us? This lesson tells us that in many cases quantity leads to quality. So of course do remember here that the quantity group was not completely focused on quality. It was also focused on trying to get the pot to be at least a reasonable pot, and in the process it was learning much more than the quality group could learn. So actually this philosophy has been embedded in many business situations and management situations, and it's known as tinkering. So essentially what happens is that if we spend a lot of time tinkering and we keep improving a process, we actually become much better in quality. So this is the case which has also been shown in a photography class, and this was done in the University of Florida, where the same experiment was repeated with pictures. So essentially this was a basic photography class, and the students were asked to make one great picture or photo, and the second group of students was asked to give a whole chunk of photos which they had developed. And again what happened is that this group which developed this large chunk of photos had a better quality in terms of the best products of that group. So this mindset can straight away be applied to research and paper publications, because as you can understand, it's very hard to write that one great and optimal paper. And if you are a PhD student or a postdoc or a faculty, if you strive to write this one great paper, you will find that this is going to be a very hard task. You may spend an enormous amount of time doing research on how to write papers. You may read various books about style and writing. You may go to different books which tell you how to make figures, what is the optimal way to visualize data, and so on. And you may also take courses on grammar and on English writing, stylistics, and at the end of this you may write a paper. In contrast, there is somebody who writes a paper which is ready for conference or journal publication, and then writes another paper, and then writes another paper, and so on. And as this quantity focused person writes more and more papers, what happens is that the quality of his or her papers becomes much better than the quality focused group. Now this fact you can see in anybody who gets prizes such as Nobel prizes and so on. So what is going to happen in most of these cases is that these people have a pretty large number of papers. They have a very high or a reasonably high H index, which means that they have at least published 50 or more journal papers, and many of these papers have often been cited many times. So what has happened with all these people is that over a large period of time they have been focusing on quantity, and while they have focused on quantities, naturally what happens even without trying is that you get better at doing whatever you are doing, and so the quality of your work keeps going up. And this is the case why you will often see that people who have more papers often have better papers, and it's very rare that a person spends 40 years in research and then writes one very great paper. So what happens is that during the PhD they write normal papers. Later in life their papers start getting better slowly. Sometimes they may not get better also, depending on the problem you're dealing with, the type of students you have, and so on. But on the long run, if you take a body of work of a researcher, maybe he has written 25 journal papers or 50 or 100, and you take the best of this lot, the quality of this best of the lot is going to be much better than a researcher who only focused on quality, maybe wrote 3 or 10 papers in his entire lifetime. So that was my take on quality versus quantity as far as paper publication is concerned, and this is something very important to keep in mind. I think this gives you a correct answer to the quality versus quantity debate. So what we can say at the end is that quantity leads to quality. So that's something you need to keep in mind. And I will end this video now, and I will see you in a video sometime soon. See you then.